So good evening, welcome back. We're looking forward to continue on page 246, 4 lines from the bottom, B'Sheidish Kol Hamidus, the source and root of all these character traits. Where do we start from again? Maybe we just continue, B'Sheidish Kol Hamidus Ha'in, but we usually, quick recap, even though, like we mentioned so many times, it's superfluous because it's really a click away. You can see all the previous classes on the or wherever. It's so easy to access wherever you're watching, but namely on the original website, tanyaonline.com. One word, Tanya online, one word that is .com. All the previous classes are lined up on the left side of the screen, and actually what comes up, that is on the top of the list, is the very latter classes. In other words, it's from top to bottom, meaning to say that the latter classes come up right away. It's much easier to notice them, and then it goes all the way back, as you know that we merited to conclude all the 3 segments. Again, Kodesh is the 4th segment in Sefirot Tanya, which has 5. We mention again, time and again, this is with precision. Tanya is the Teda Shebiksav of Teda Sachsidus, thus the 5 segments. Presently, we're learning the 4th, which is the Geras HaKodesh, known as the Holy Epistles of the Alter Rebbe. We merited to conclude all the first Likutei Amorim, Sheikhah V'Emunah, and Geras HaTshuva, the first 3, and they're also lined up on this very site. For that matter, we periodically cross-reference in the Sefirot Tanya. The Tanya itself cross-references many times to other areas in the entire Sefer, and it's again set up in a way that it's easy to access any pedic, any chapter. For that matter, what we're learning now is based on the Alter Rebbe introduced. In other words, it's based on the 10 known 10 Sefirot, which are mentioned myriads of times and so many times, and it's really part of the whole setup and the presentation of Pnimis HaTorah, Kabbalah, Zayar, and so on, the 10 Sefirot, which is based on Psukim and Torah, Chochma, Tvuna, Das, known more as Chochma, Bina, Das, and then the Chesed, Gura, Tiferes, Netzach, Heid, Yesod, Malchus, which is compartmentalized with the 3 Meichin and the 7 Midas, the 3 cognitive faculties, and the 7 Midas, which are offsprings. That's what they're called, Toldes. Chacham Bina called Avoim, which produce Midas. That is, it has nothing to do with the 10 Sefirot Kedoshis and Elyonos, the supreme and holy 10 Sefirot. This is the way it is, that what you profoundly understand, that's what gives birth to your drive to this which you understand and appreciate. Or if it's something that your mind captures the severity, the gravity of it, so it causes a certain awe, fear, depending again what you're contemplating on, what you're meditating on, and so on. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya Kadisha introduces this in the 3rd chapter of Likutei Amorim, the very first segment of Tanya. So right there you have that important reference, which is the Alter Rebbe's making note rather of these 10 Sefirot, which are part and parcel of the neshama. This is what the neshama is all about. The Nefesh Hasheinis B'Yisrael, the Alter Rebbe began in the 2nd chapter of Likutei Amorim. That is, you could also see the beginning of Beis, which is always worth to see. The Alter Rebbe's first such a clear and poignant manner of describing what the Yid is all about. The Nefesh Hasheinis B'Yisrael, it's Chelik L'Kami Mal Mamash, it's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the very third chapter, Alter Rebbe says, this neshama is divided into 10. There's 10 Sefirot. And these 10 Sefirot are in a very organized way, how the neshama relates with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's excited with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ignites its love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Fear, awe. Starting from the Chochma Bina Das. The neshama has the ability to perceive, to have a clear perception of the godly reality. How could a created being have a clear perception of the godly reality? The answer is very simple. We're talking about the neshama, which is not, eventually became a nivra, of course, but nonetheless, the neshama is a chelik l'kavimal. It is part of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So if it's part of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, of course, it can have a clear understanding and perception of the reality of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Just like a Kodesh Baruch Hu, so to say, has a clear perception and reality of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, the neshama, which is part of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, part of Hashem, of course, can have a clear and decisive understanding and appreciation of the reality of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And when it does, and it produces a feeling of love towards a Kodesh Baruch Hu, this is a genuine love, genuine drive the neshama has towards a Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's a godly drive, it's a godly love, because it's part of the neshama. We spoke about this again, we're saying this in brief, but we spoke about this so many times. So what about the entire Esses Sfiris, which we were introduced in that very chapter? Tell us about it, a bit more about it. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yisayid. Chesed, Gvura would be Ava V'yira. Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yisayid, Malchus. The Alter Rebbe does not elaborate in that chapter. Again, third chapter, L'Kutei Amorim. This is the 15th, and you get a HaKadosh in the fourth segment. So the very, very first segment, and again, it's also lined up to click away. The third, Alter Rebbe begins, this neshama has Esses Sfiris, and Alter Rebbe himself points out, what about, he explains you Chochmah, Bina, Das towards the end of that chapter, divides also Chochmah, Bina from Das, is the reason why the Alter Rebbe does so. He explains there itself, we understand that Das is very unique, even in comparison to Chochmah, Bina. It's not about a informational experience, it's a transformational experience. Again, you can see it there, not to go into it. And then he says, Chesed Gvura, that's Ava V'yira, love and fear. What about the other midas? The Rebbe doesn't ignore the other midas. He says, the other midas are anfel, they are branches. The chief midas is Chesed Gvura. We can understand, and the more we learn about the other midas, we understand that they're branches of the Chesed Gvura, these chief midas. From Gimel, L'Kutei Amorim, all the way to the 15th of Igeres HaKodesh, there's no other chapters. The Alter Rebbe takes the time, a lot of time actually, for us to continue. I believe this is the 12th class. Unusual. This is a lengthier chapter. The Alter Rebbe takes the time to explain us every single midah, and the Chochmah, Bina, Das, and then all the other seven, the 7 midas, that is, in other words, the entire package of the 10 spheres are presented over here in elaboration, in detail. Alter Rebbe dissects every single midah, which is of course a freshener. It of course gives such clarity to other chapters which we learn in L'Kutei Amorim. It's a divided Ani and Makom Echad, Hashem Makom Sheni. But in the end of the day, it's not only Makom Echad and Makom Sheni. It's just when you learn this chapter, you could understand many ideas which are related to in the Alter Rebbe's L'Kutei Amorim and the other Alter Rebbe's works, because this is where we know so clearly the function of all the expression and function of all these 10 spheres. And what the Alter Rebbe does is, not only does he dissect each sphera in context of the relationship of the Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he gives a whole entire mashal, which is also part of the lengthiness of this chapter Tezvav. This Igeres, this letter, the 15th Igeres HaKodesh. He brings a mashal, in an example, a parable, how it relates to something which is a bit more relatable to us, which is, in our world, the master and the student is the example that Alter Rebbe gives. Of course, there's so many other ways in the context of the giver and the recipient, how it works with the 10 spheres. Alter Rebbe used a very classic example between the master and the pupil, and how those 10 spheres unfold. And then from there, of course, there's the very beginning of this Igeres HaKodesh, which is also aligned with this idea, but an important message on its own. But from there, the Alter Rebbe goes to the Nimshul, to the message in the relationship of the Yid and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Yid and the Almighty. How does this all unfold? How does our neshama, which is comprised of 10 spheres, unfold in the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So till now, if you're following, So you know exactly what we're holding b'sheidish, because we concluded all these midas. The Alter Rebbe went through Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Yisei, and Malchus, and in detail, much detail, in a very, very special way of explaining each midah. A number of midas the Alter Rebbe explains in different ways. Netzach and Haid as an example, as you can see. If you're following, if you're not, you can see it in the previous classes. Again, a click away, TanyaOnline.com. And so last week we concluded the final midah, which is midah Malchus. This week begins. What is the source? What is the root of the midas? We should know by now. It's Chochmah Bina Das. They are called the parents which produce the midas, like it is. Again, nothing to do with the Tanya, or this is the way it is. You understand something thoroughly, you understand a program, for example, and you find more and more interest, and then you realize this can contribute to your wealth, as an example, to your parnasa, to your livelihood. So you dig into it more, and you try to encapsulate or elaborate, that is, on the details of this program. And you appreciate it, and it works for you. Your mind connects with it, and the more you do so, the more you gravitate to inculcate this into your system, into your program, into your day schedule, or whatever it is, in order that eventually this should actually start working for you. You'll start working on it. It'll work for you, and it'll bring you the benefit that you desire. But where does it start? It starts from the fact that your mind appreciated it. Because your mind appreciated it, so you gravitate to it. You want it. You want to connect to it. Not necessarily connect, meaning to say you want it to become part of your reality, because you understand that this can contribute to your livelihood, as an example. But it works on every single way. You're mizbeinin, you meditate on something, you connect to it on an intellectual level. Of course, that ignites your drive to it. Would be ava, love. Again, love in the broader sense. If it's something that you feel that your mind captured something that you realize the gravity of it, a certain idea, so then your heart ignites with a certain awe, fear, one way or another. And if you understand the greatness of a personality, in the yesteryear's example would be a king, or even today we can have some great, important individual, authoritarian, meaning to say someone who has authority, respectful, of course, authority. So then there's a certain reverence to that person, to that party, especially if it's a deeper person, especially, of course, as Yidden, someone who has true kabid, true chacham b'Yisrael, as an example, a gadol b'Yisrael. The more you understand the greatness of this person, it establishes in your heart a reverence towards that person, because midas are told as Chabad. Again, this lashon there in the Alter Rebbe, again, it's in the third chapter, which is the very beginning of Tanya. The midas are offsprings of Chochmah Bina Das, of the ability to cognitively capture any matter. The Eibishter Hashem is, or in part and parcel of the neshama. For that matter, it's not only the neshama. The nefesh hasichos, the nefesh bahamis. Even the nefesh bahamis is more midas, more than meichid, as we can understand. But nonetheless, it also has the ability to understand, perceive, that in the end of the day, that would contribute to my comfort, so I gravitate to it. Of course, it works on all levels. All the nefashis have this setup of 10. So Alter Rebbe concludes, referring, of course, or in this presentation again, as Alter Rebbe speaks about in the Nimshul, it's the Sefirot Hakdeshes associated with the Neshama, which is the Chelik of the Kavi Malma. Of course, each midah is towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Alter Rebbe go through all the midas. The last one was Malchus. Of course, Malchus is Kabbalah Malchus Shemayim, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can see it in last week's class where we elaborated on this midah of Malchus. And we know, again, Alter Rebbe begins, the source and root of these midas are Mechabad, from Chacham Bina Das, which is interesting today's day, to learn about this. This is the establishment of the day of Chabad in its full glory. As we know, this is what the celebration of the day is all about. So Chabad would be, again, the fourth line from the bottom, Me Chochma Bina Das, from the three cognitive faculties. Tahainu, started again over here, additional to what he does speak about the Chochma, the Bina, yes, in detail, quite in a detailed manner, in the third chapter of the first segment. But here the Alter Rebbe again repeats a similar idea, starting from Chochma. Chochma is Mekeira Seichel, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu Melech Olam Shakel Nemidvari. It's the source of the Seichel, the source of the intellect, Hamasi is Hashem, which is able to perceive HaKadosh Baruch Hu, V'chochmosei, and perceive Hashem, and His wisdom, Ugdolas, in Hashem's greatness, Umideis Avakdeishes, and His holy, and Hashem's holy Midos, Hashem's holy Midos. Midas, we're talking about Chochmah. No, our Chochmah grasps and is able to understand Hashem and V'chochmosoi. This is referring all to these following words are referring to Hashem. V'chochmosoi, and Hashem's wisdom, Ugdolasoi, Hashem's greatness. Midas of Akdeshus, Hashem's holy Midas. Shemaning and Mechayim by Kol Olamis Elyenim V'Tachtenim, which He directs and leads and vivifies through them, through the Hashem's Midas, all the supreme worlds and the lower worlds. That is what the Chochmah of the Yid captures. The Chochmah of the Neshama is able to capture that and have a clear understanding in that and clear perception in that. A clear appreciation in HaKadosh Baruch Hu again, because it's a chelik of the Kami Mal Mamash. It's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so when it has the ability to intellectualize, of course, what is it perceiving? What is it investing itself? What is the Chochmah of the Nefesh Elikis investing in the capturing, Masi, the ability to appreciate the godly reality, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem's wisdom, Hashem's greatness, Hashem's holy character traits through which He leads and guides and vitalizes and vivifies all the worlds, the supreme and the inferior. That is the Chochmah. Bina, who is Beinin as Basaguz Ubeirach Vareichev, V'Eimek, Bina say Lav Davar Mitach Davar. What is Bina? What's the difference Chochmah Bina? You have to see the preview of that chapter. Here the Alter Rebbe doesn't speak so much exactly the very difference. He puts it in words, but when you read and you learn, and I encourage you to go there, the third chapter of Likutei Amorim, wherever you're learning Tanya, on this site you can see it, it's a click away as well, but you can see there the Alter Rebbe differentiates, establishes very clearly the difference between Chochmah and Bina. Here he puts it in different words, but again, you read this, you could understand and glean the same information. Chochmah is an akuda, it's a barakat mavrik, known to be called the flash, what flashes, which is called the koyach ma. That's what Chochmah actually is called. The word Chochmah is koyach ma. It's the initial flash, the initial insight, and this works in all areas of the mind trying to capture information which is actually, let's say, in a sefer, as an example, but it's not only limited to when it's something in a book that you're reading or a sefer that you're learning, but you're looking at something and it doesn't click because you don't see the message in the words, and you go back and forth and back and forth, and all of a sudden there's a flash, and you say, and it all makes sense. Sometimes it's like a few lines together. You got the idea. And the words start making sense, and perfect sense. Not one word is extra. A moment ago you were lost. It almost meant you didn't see the light. You didn't see how the words bring about that message, and you're ma'ayin. You get involved, and you put your mind to it to find the message. You know the message is there. You know it's not just that it's a message which is written in the sefer by a responsible whatever you're learning, this is not just like something that you're trying to decode something that maybe it's going to send a message or not. It's written cryptically. No, something which is written that many people do understand it, and you have not to get it yet, and you're learning and you're meditating, you're putting your mind to it, and all of a sudden the light turns, and the entire few lines make perfect sense. As an example, again, it's not limited to via a sefer, a book, or Havdalah sefer. Using just this as an example. That's the Chochmah, a flash, and all of a sudden, makes perfect sense. And let's say you're sitting with somebody which is trying to appreciate this same matter that you are. And they ask you, so what did you get? Tell me right away. Hold on a minute. Let me now take the time. Or let me now grasp it in a way that I could say my ownership of it. That I take ownership of it, meaning to say that I take that concept, that initial flash, and elaborate it, allow it to expand, that is, in my mind, as Al-Tana writes, in length, in breadth, in depth, and understand it in a way that I literally translate a thing from a thing, meaning to say that I expand it in my mind to understand every part of it and to be able to extrapolate different details from the initial thought in its expansion of the concept that I happen to invest my mind in. Dover mitech dover, in other words, many details, which on the surface they are more generally presented, but when I understand it in its breadth and its length and its depths, many details start gleaning and coming out from the overall haskalah. And that again contributes to the expansiveness of the concept, to my own mind and my hands-on, my ownership of it. Then, as an example, the other party asks me, so what did you understand? Of course, let me start explaining it to you, because I grasped it in it again, in its length, breadth, and depth. And therefore I could present it to another party as an example, but namely it's to myself. I got it. While the chokhmah is more the initial connection, the intellectual initial connection, or the initial intellectual connection to the matter, while bina is taking that which I just understood, but again, acutely, very sharply. For that matter, it says that when the flash comes on, there's something very, very acute, meaning that many times can get lost in the expansiveness of Bina. We spoke about it then also, sometimes Chokhmah, because in the end also, between Misa and Yonu, Chokhmah really grasps the emes of it. Later, it's the way many times it could be diluted, because it's already me understanding it as opposed to the concept itself, which is turned on in my mind. But in the end of the day, it doesn't have to always be so. That is the famous nukuda beheichola, that I don't lose. I work on it never to lose that initial flash, even though it will never be the same as we all could appreciate it. That flash comes out so sharp and so clear. In one hand, I cannot immediately give it over because it's too clear, it's too concise, it's too brief, but you have something very powerful and potent in that message, in that flash, yet that has that intangibility because of its sharpness, because of the brightness would be the better word, to be the brightness. It's so bright, so it remains intangible because it comes and goes. It's not something that I have, as opposed to establishing this in my mind in a way of bina, meaning to say, dissecting the matter in its eirach, reichav, and eimek, which is the idea of bina. There is the ability. This gives me the ability to hold on to it. Again, yes, to own it, and it's mine, and therefore I can give it over to another party. The point is to contain the nekuda beicholas, as brought this lashon in many places. See this many times as an example, that I should not lose. Many times you expand a certain concept, you could lose that nekuda. You could deviate from the nekuda, from the point, from the message, from this which you're trying to appreciate. So it's important to try to never lose that chokhmah in the bina. And the reason why you have to make an effort to it, because when you expand on something, so there is such a simple possibility that you would lose out on or remove from the chokhmah, the original capture of the original idea of the way it is, which is, again, that's the kayach of that initial barak hamavrik. You see that there's something very clear, a certain light opens up, and that when you cross over to bina, to take that, it could be lost, but you make an effort that it should not be lost, which is, again, very important in many, many different ways, particularly when it comes to our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In many, many different ways, it says, the essentiality of never losing the chokhmah, the nekuda in the heichola. Heichola is literally translated a chamber. Nekuda is a dot. chamber is, of course, expansive. It's a full chamber. Chamber would be synonymous with bina because it is already expanded on. The point is to make sure, again, not to lose the nekuda in the heichal, in this chamber of bina, which is not, doesn't say this over here, but I'm just mentioning this, how important it is, because you have the chokhmah, and you have this bina, and eventually, this is the ava eim hamelides, which give birth to midas. So therefore, it's important that they're both stand and express the amitius, the truth of both of them, and again in unison, and they both produce healthy todes, that the ava should be a true ava to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, an ava which never forgets that the emes with the truth, that bright truth which was captured through the chokhmah. And when the bina expands on it, of course, that gives the opportunity that there should be the actual ava. That's why it's called the Avaim. It's not enough the father, but it's the mother takes that nekuda of the father and it expands on it for 9 months for them, and then gives birth to a healthy child. In this case, also the midas, in the end of the day, come from the chokhmah, which is the nekuda, and the bina. And again, it's important in our Avodas Hashem. True, the love will come from the end of the day through the bina because you own and you are so connected with it in a way that you have a clear, a very strong and clear understanding and perception of a matter. That's what ultimately bring the midas. Of course, you need the das. The das is an important component. As Dr. Rebbe writes in that very chapter, it's worth to see how the Alter Rebbe translates that, because apparently if you have the chokhmah and the bina, you have the entire concept already. Why do you need the das? You have it in full expansion. Bina, what does the das contribute? Yeah, you need the das. Take a look in the end of the 3rd chapter, and then why the Alter Rebbe writes how das is so vital in order to have the actual production of those midas av v'yira chesed gvura tiferes netzach yisod, because without the das, nothing will ever happen. You got to see it there. End of the 3rd chapter in Likutei Amorim. Let's click away over here, wherever you can get your hands on the, wherever you're learning Tanya, or any way you're learning Tanya, see the 3rd chapter, the end of the 3rd chapter of Likutei Amorim. So, the Alter Rebbe continues over here. When you have the Chokhmah Bina, because this is the Mokar V'Sherish Kol HaMidas, the root and the source of all the Midas, so this is what Lahoilid, we're holding, after Davar Mitod, Lahoilid, to produce Me'asagazu, from this perception, from this capture, from this understanding, till they sell the offspring, which are the Midas. Av v'yira, love and fear, which is chesed and gevura, v'shar midas, and the other midas which are produced in the godly soul, hamaskelas umizbeinenes b'dus Hashem, which is maskil, which is more the chachma, the haskala, the umizbeinenes, and the experiencing the experience rather of the bina maskelas umizbeinenes b'dus Hashem, that godly soul which understands, perceives, and expands on the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Haskala would be the Chachma, Umizbeinenes, of course the Bina. B'Gilus Hashem, the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Gidul Gulase in Cheker. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Gidul, there is no end. And how does the Nefesh HaDikis capture that Gidulase in Cheker, which would produce a true Ava to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And we say Ava is love without any limits, to the famous expression Cholas Ava, lovesick, which is a common expression which gives us the ability to understand what true love is all about. For that matter, the Rambam holds back no in Hilchos Tshuva, I believe it's the Perik Yud, which speaks about the Av of the Yitah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he doesn't shy away from any words and examples, famously, that he doesn't have any other on his mind than that person because he is so in love with that person and so on. You're talking about love. And here you're talking about love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How could you have that love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Another party I can understand. I'm excited about another party, so that I gravitate to the other party. But how do we have a clear understanding and greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the extent like the Lasa and Cheker, the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the no end, meaning to say the infinite greatness, or the greatness which is expressed by the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how could the neshama connect to that and establish this love? And what does the love look like? Yeah, the love looked like Kleis HaNefesh. The Alter Rebbe has it in the 50th chapter. Worth to see it also, the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe. He goes, Kleis HaNefesh Mamash. We had the question, how's the Kleis HaNefesh Mamash? Because Kleis HaNefesh means you expire, similar, one expires, as an example, Nodav Avihu. Famously, you see many commentators, namely the Eir HaChaim, famous Eir HaChaim, HaKodesh, which speaks about Nodav Avihu, that they were ready to be subsumed and consumed into the godly reality, which they did. They did consume into the godly reality, and they left their body behind in total expiration of body, because they had this chasheiko chafetza lashon of the Eir HaChaim. They had this rotz and this cheshek and chayfetz, which different expressions of gravitation towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, they lost it. They became one with Hashem, and the bodies, consequently, were stay behind. That's what Havas Hashem looks like. And if you look in the Predicated, the Alter Rebbe says, yeah, the Yid has that also. Kleis HaNefesh Mamash. We ask the question, so how does he continue after that Kleis HaNefesh? If you see, it's a very interesting question. Again, we try to answer it there also. But of course, it would be Kleis HaNefesh, because what is the neshama meditating on? That Hashem gave me a good parnasa? Of course, you have a love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're driven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you know and you're honest that that Hashem is your life and the length of your days. So you acknowledge it. You have established a liking, a loving towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that wouldn't establish a Kleis HaNefesh, a complete subsumption of the soul towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because you're focusing on yourself, on chayecha v'erechamecha, your life and your length of your days. So you know Hashem is the one who's providing for you. So of course you love Hashem, but at the end of the day you don't lose it. You don't lose yourself into the experience, because the focus is on yourself, and you're connecting, and recognizing that Hashem is the one who's providing it for you. But it's chayecha, erech yomecha. Here we're talking about the meditation, not on how what Hashem does for me, but ligdulasayin cheker, understanding the infinite greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And imagine what a love which is produced of this clarity in the mind of the nefesh elikis, and the godly reality. In a way, is chokhmah and bina, and namely das. Again, you can see there why das is so significant. He Alter Rebbe points it out in this very chapter, towards the end of this very chapter as well, towards the end of this Igenis as well. So what does the Ava which is produced look like? Yeah, that's meant to be similar to the Ava of Nodav Avihu, because your mind is capturing the Ligdulasi and Cheker dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the infinite dimension, the infinite dynamics of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the infinite reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So of course the Ava which is produced should have that infinite love which is no stopping, if you will. In other words, I want to be part of it. And if you want to be part of the infinite, yeah, you usually lose the finite component of yourself, composure of yourself. Like, this is the Nodav Avihu experience, which could and should exist by the end. But the question is, how is it possible that my mind should be able to understand the Lasei and Cheker of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The answer is yes, because you're talking about the Nefesh Elikis. And Alter Rebbe writes over here clearly, the Nefesh Elikis is the godly soul which is understanding this Lasei and Cheker. And the Nefesh Elikis is a Chelik Elikami Malmam, which is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if it's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, like God could perceive God, of course, He is God. We have a godly reality, mamosh, within us. This is the DNA of the Yid, which makes him a Yid, and therefore when it kicks in, so to say, with the Esesfiris, it allows the Nefesh Elikis to express its own self, which is, again, this is the Nefesh Elikis itself, the Esesfiris, like the Alter Rebbe establishes at the very beginning of that third chapter of Likutei Amorim. And it has the ability to be maskil and mizbein in the greatness of God. So the Ava would follow. So the Ava would follow suit because Lidos and Cheker is genuine, it's authentic. This is what the Nefesh Elikis is. It's a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so it could really capture the reality, the true reality, the infinite reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lidos and Cheker of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Famous expression of the Baal Shem Tov, even though there he says in the context of davening, but yeah, this is what davening is really all about. To get into the arena of the experience itself, no more practicing, meaning to say that the person before davening would learn something which allows his mind to be totally occupied of the hisbeinenus, the haskala and the havana and the gedulas Hashem, the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, more so in the gedulas in cheker dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So then you come into the arena of davening, which is the process begins that his beinenus turns into more a hergish, a sensation. It's explained in a number of places in terms of the studying the matters before davening and then the davening itself. That's why it's important to. There's a number of places to think over, not only as a concept, but something which is real. And then you open the Siddur, you say, Haidul Hashem Kiru Vishmai. Yeah, that's a different Haidul Hashem Kiru Vishmai. And you go on through the entire davening. The Baal Shem Tov we just mentioned, Baal Shem Tov famously said that every single year after davening, every day needed to bench HaGoimel. Because how'd you come out of the experience? How were you able to leave davening sanely and they go ahead with your approach and your outlook on reality is totally different and distinct post davening every day, and that's why it's important that we daven every single day, 3 times a day, but namely the Shacharis prayer, which will really take the time to invest and express that sensational connection between the Yid and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, you'll come out of davening, and it's a different day, and it's a different approach to life. So again, davening is very important. It's essential. We're not talking about the checklist. If you davening, like the Alter Rebbe writes, Hashem, famous expression of the Alter Rebbe, and it's worthwhile to see also Igeres HaKadosh, the 4th segment, the first Igeres. Number of places the Alter Rebbe speaks about the essentiality of davening every single day, davening the way one is meant to daven, in order to, on the simple level, when you daven, a person can go through the other 24 hours or 23 hours in a proper way. And if he doesn't daven, yeah, it becomes a little bit shaky, if you will. A lot has to be done in order to go through the end of the day with a clean slate. Davening changes. It's a change. It's a metamorphosis, our entire approach to the entire 23 subsequent hours. It's transformational. Davening is indeed transformational, and therefore every day a person because what does it mean? A day is going to go by and I'm just going to let it be just mediocrely connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I have a tool that I can make it completely connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we come out of davening, of course, differently. And then the entire day is different. Alimidat Torah is different. The Kiyum Mitzvahs is different. Our emes approach of the approach on realities of Eilam, and therefore the way I go along with my day and never lose focus why I'm here with my mandate and so on. It's a different approach. But Baal Shem Tov says more so that by davening, if you really had a great davening, which we're meant to have, a perfect davening, again, the word perfect, every day is even be different, but nonetheless, there's the idea that you connected to the Ein Sof, which is common, meant to be common every single davening. If it was 10 seconds, 10 minutes, or maybe 3 seconds, it was real. You connected to that infinite reality. So how did you come out of davening? And how did you come out B'chlal? Why wasn't there Klais HaNefesh? Another Babi experience. And it makes so much sense. If you really were there and you were able to understand and appreciate and your midas, that ava, that drive to that infinite reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so how'd you ever come out? Says the Baal Shem Tov that doesn't make sense how we came out of it normal, or just came out of it. And therefore he said we have to bench HaGoimel. Of course, Alter Rebbe wasn't encouraging we should go to the Sefirot and say Hashem's name. No. Of course he didn't mean that. He meant conceptually. Because if you davened, you had a miracle that you came out of davening alive and sane. You see that, for example, It's not like he died. He had another Avi experience. So, this is, in the end of the day, we have to give it all we got when we daven in order to, don't worry, Hashem will do the miracle. And Hashem established that miracles are going to happen every day. Even we have an authentic, we don't have to be worried about it. Throw yourself into it, and halavai, we should be able to really have a good davening, that we should have that very miracle that we came out alive, or we came out sane, we came out regular, because Hashem did the miracle for us. Well, nice to get there, but this is what davening is supposed to, davening is all about, because it's based on the capture and the understanding and the perception of the neshama, which is a chelik l'kamimal, which has the ability to have that pure the understanding and the purity, the unadulterated purity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the infinite reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which would ultimately produce these midas, Av, V'yira, and the other midas, which are lined up here in the Alter Rebbe in detail, dissected in so carefully, midah by midah by midah, which is all again a production of the Haskalah and these beinus in Dulas Hashem. Then the Alter Rebbe continues, Yesh Dulas Hashem Shadei's beinus and Shalikis Batip L'Olei Masav Facha. As we just mentioned, that there's certain his beinus, a certain capturing of the mind of the Haskalah and Havana of the Nefshalikis, which speaks about the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which would produce a awe and fear and a reverence, because I'm his beinus, my intellectual, hands-on, and investment is in matters which I think about the HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a melech malchei amlochim, and therefore what would it produce? Not necessarily an avo, if that's what my focus is on. It's more the aim of a fachad, the fear, the awe, the reverence, which is yira tata, shibchinis malchus, which is the inferior yira. Why is this inferior? Seems like a very special yira. So the Alter Rebbe explains, and you look in Predicated Mem Aleph, the 41st chapter, where he speaks about this idea of Hashem being Melech Malcham Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then he says there's many deeper levels of yira, many different layers, and then yira tata yira ilah is not only that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Melech, therefore I fear him. The person enters into the area, into the arena, so to say, of the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His yira is not I fear something, I fear the king, I have reverence of the king. It's much deeper, that you become part of that malchus, so to say. You become part, you melt. Your yira itself becomes a part of the experience, not only as two separate ideas, as the king which I fear. You become, so to say, consumed into the very experience itself. You could see it there in Mem Aleph, Mem Beis. Alter Rebbe speaks about the idea of yira, quotes the famous Gemara of Moshe Rabbeinu, Mo Hashem Alekecha Deidish B'mcha Ki Im Li Yiras Hashem. He says that's yira tata, and then the yira is the yira ilah. As he goes on there, and he says generally there is many levels, layers in every midah, as we can understand it at all levels. Are there many layers in love between one party and another? Of course there are. Deeper and deeper and much deeper, as we can understand. Deeper meaning it's much more of a sensational experience, an exhilarating experience, or an initial gravitation to the other party, a loving gravitation to the other party. And so too when it comes to yira. You can see those chapters. So here you go. He speaks about that. He's beinus, that meditation which produces yira, and then Dulas Hashem men ba yira. There's one thinking of the grandness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which brings about the supreme yira beishus. Beishus means shame, but not like something which would shame me, but I feel my total insignificance. And basically in those chapters, just to say it at least succinctly, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the izbeinus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's memale kol almin, investing in creating worlds, and then which produces yira tata, because there's still a mitzias of olam. I'm focusing on HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the creator, and I'm and therefore Olam is a Metzius, and again, it's a bit cryptic over here, but you see it also in the 43rd. We did 41st, 42nd. Look at the 43rd chapter, Likutei Amarim. It's a click away where he speaks about right away towards the beginning of the Pedic, the Izbeinus, which comes from Malaklam, which because Olam is still in Metzius, Hashem being the creator of the world, so you give credence or significance to the Olam, which you're part of the Olam, and therefore it's Yirat, it's you who fears HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to these Beinus and Seva Klam, the transcendent dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So then there is no Olam, it's a complete Kula Kamei, because you're focusing on the total Kamei of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Seva Klam, the way Hashem has formed himself by himself, the infinite reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So everything is completely bottled there. Nothing exists in the face of the infinite. The finite does not exist in the face of the infinite. So everything is completely subsumed into the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So is my Yira. That's why it's a Yira law, Yira Beishus. It's not a matter of shame, meaning to say the total insignificance of oneself in the face of the grander reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the inner reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No one is saved of Kalam. And again, you got to see it. It's there, 43rd chapter, in Likutei Amarim, which is the first segment. And then from Yira, the Alter Rebbe goes to Abba. Even though in Sfiris there's Chesed, why would the Alter Rebbe do this over here? Not start from Abba and Yira. I believe on the surface, which is the message in the very beginning of Mem Aleph, that the Yid initiates his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Like the Mishnah says, Lama Kodma, the Gemara says, Lama Kodma Shema, I believe it's a Mishnah also, Lama Kodma Shema B'Haim Shemaya, Sheyikabel El Malchus Shemayim. El Malchus, they first accept the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The initial relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, of course, the Nasa and then the Nishma, the adherence, the accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fear. And again, that's the message, an important part of the message of the Alter Rebbe in Perek Mem Aleph, in the very beginning of Perek Mem Aleph, that all our Avodas Hashem are to be predicated on our fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, knowing that Hashem is Melech, Malchei, Amlech, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the King of all kings. And even the Avos Hashem has to be based on the Yira, understanding that Hashem is a Melech, and we have to Mekabel Olav Machusei, Kil Lasan Al Terabi, Kil Chol Avedas Eved Ladein, like all servants of the servants to his master. And then you can start building Yir, Ava, Yira. So I believe the Alter Rebbe begins over here, even though he just said Chesed Gemura, and Ava comes before Yira in the Midas. But nonetheless, he begins with Yira for this reason. And he goes on and he says, and that was first the Yira, and then he goes on to the Ava. There's his Beinanus, Amaskol and Avona, which is about the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which again, because the Haskalah, which I invested, my mind was more on the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not in the context of the Malchus as much, which would establish a Yira, the two levels of Yira, Tatori law, but rather this is Beinanus, which would produce Avas Hashem. He said, Be'esh b'china shemimena bo ava rabo, Be'esh b'china shemimena bo ava zuta, which is the great love. Ava zuta is what it means to say the smaller love. What does it mean? Ava rabo, ava zuta. So you can see that very chapter. 42nd, 43rd, that is, clearly the 43rd, these are the Lashenis, Mamash, Lashenis of 43rd. He said even, it's interesting when it comes to Abba, the Alter Rebbe divides into three, the Abba that comes directly with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then the Abba, which the Yid is Mizbeinin, and these two is the levels of Memalakalam and Sevakalalmin, which produce different types of Abba. But there he speaks about a third Abba, which is Abba Rabba, coming directly from Atzilus, literally, the unadulterated purity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes in towards the Yid and connects intimately with the Yid. So in the onset, it's a different type of Abba, not based on Yori's Beinanus, not based on your, but that itself has to be captured by the mind and the composure, the complete structure of the person has to be present, of course, to experience that Abba Rabba with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So these are different levels of Abba, based on the person that means Beinanus in the Yid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, his meditative experience, which would produce again Ava Rabba and Ava Zuta, if his Beinanus is associated with the Abba of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which would lead, so the type of hisbeinus which would lead to these avos, which is associated with chesed, but that's the inner dimension of chesed. And then there is the chibimidas hachitzenius in chesed, the idea of kindness, actual kindness, as he explains in this, when he speaks about the kindness over here in the chelik of the Kamimal, the previous page, Kuf Chav Gimel on the bottom, because you love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so therefore you're hadbek b'midaisa, you identify, you cleave, you identify with the midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning to say that you follow and do the same as HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning to say the lashon of the Gemara, hadvik b'midaita, identify your midas with Hashem's midas, line your midas up with Hashem's midas, because just like Hashem is a rachum, you're a rachum, Hashem is a chanun, Hashem is merciful and Hashem is graceful and Hashem is kind, you do the same. Mimic HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you meaning to say you do the same as HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you line your midas up with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's the chesed, not as a feeling, not as a sensation. That's the pnimius of the chesed, the outer dimension of the chesed. Yes, you actually align your midas with the midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like that Gemara. The actualization of your love. And then the Alter Rebbe continues, Uvakulon tzorich liyes melubosh behem b'chinas hadas. Shehu b'chinas iskashus hanefesh hakshuro tkua ba'asog hazu shemaseges eze inyan migdolus Hashem. Here the Alter Rebbe, just like in the third chapter, and it's interesting, a similar order. The Alter Rebbe there begins with Chochma Bina, and then he goes on to the Midas, and then he goes into Das. And the simple reason is because Bina apparently has the entire capture of this which you're understanding, intellectualizing on. What do you need the idea of Das? What's that faculty of Das? How does it contribute to the production of these Midas? There the Alter Rebbe explains that it's not a matter of understanding something which is informational, because something which is informational not necessarily produces a true ava and yira towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, it's expressed by the other midas towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You need the das. The das, briefly, we're going to stop over here, and we'll look forward next week to continue. And hopefully we'll make a siyum next week, God willing, on this chapter. So, but briefly, as you see, in all, there has to be the das. Again, just like in that chapter, the Alter Rebbe, the Chochem Bina, the Midas, and then he goes to Das, and he explains to you why Das is so important. Because in order to have the production, you have to not only look at something conceptually, but look at something as a reality. That this is the way it is, which means, in other words, just like Das is not only knowledge. Tanya uses the lashon das not in the context of knowledge, but in the context of a relationship. V'ha'adam yoda es Chava, that he related with Chava. That is not only a knowledge, but that's an intimate knowledge, of course, an intimate connection. And one has to become intimate with a concept, if you will, to make it real in order to have the production of Ava V'yira. Because if it's not real and it's not transformational in your mind, meaning to say it's not only just a concept, it becomes something which is a reality. We mentioned earlier, this is similar to this which is spoken about, that Abayim demanded it to take a moment. Sometimes could be 60 seconds, or maybe even less. Someone learns, let's say, before davening, he learns Amayim Chassidus, and he understands it thoroughly. What is in full function at that moment? His Chachman Bina. Ask him Pshat, he could tell you Pshat in detail and beautifully present to you the concept that he just learned, because he understands it. But it's still a concept. In order to have that real, to exercise a real, genuine davening, that Haydul Hashem Kir B'Shmei, that you're in that arena, that relationship, that intimate relationship with davening, that's what davening is meant to be, to lose yourself into the experience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not enough. There is a gap between something which is conceptual to something which is meant to be sensational. And therefore it's important to pause before you go davening. Take 60 seconds or 3 minutes. It doesn't matter, each one to his own, and not every day is the same, not every opportunity is the same. And look, whatever you learned as a reality, this is it. You learned about Sevev Kolalmin, you learned about Ani Hashem Leishonisi, The famous presentations of the Alter Rebbe as an example. And if you really think into it, it's sometimes, I don't want to say it's scary, but here you can see where the Baal Shem Tov says, yeah, what a miracle that you came out of this experience. Look in the end of chapter Yutes and Chaf Aleph. Chaf and Chaf Aleph is an example. Or in Shayichet V'Emunah, Hashem Hu Elokim. The idea that Kodesh Baruch Hu was here and now exactly in the same way that he was before creation. It's only about the Ein Sof here, now, right over here. Here is here. And you think about it profoundly, not as a concept, but as a reality. And then you open the Siddur, you say, Baruch Atah Hashem, you're talking face to face with the deepest connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That happens only when you take the concept and make it real. Now, whatever I learned, yes, there is the Seviv Kalam dynamic or the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu here, right now, Seviv Kalam. And then you start davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, that's when the davening itself becomes transformational, because you took something which is conceptual, a concept, and you thought about it with a das. You became intimate with a concept. Literally mean das, in this case, becoming intimate with a concept, intimate with the information, making it real. And that's where it would produce the Av of the year. And the Alter Rebbe says it very clear, very, very strong lashon there. That if it's not with das, you have the Havana, you have the Suga, you have the clear understanding, you have a beautiful class. On a Maimer Chassidus, it doesn't mean that you became closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't mean rather your love was turned on to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That you have Av of Yirah, true love and fear to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't mean that at all. You gave one class, another class, and you explained 100 people, 1,000 people. No. Are you become closer in the overall to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Of course you are. Because you're not reading anything else, and you're learning Tedas Hashem. Tedas Chassidus is part of Tedas Hashem. Which is important to note. You can never pick and choose and say, oh, this is a part I'm learning, this part I'm not learning. It's all part of Tedas Hashem. Just like someone say, I don't learn Gemara. I only learn, no, Gemara you must learn. That's part of Tedas Hashem. And then we have to learn Gemara and Yishayim and Achreidim and every part of Torah. But that's more the Nigla of the Torah, including the Yishayim and Achreidim, which is a part of the same, overall the same package. But this Pshat, the Rebbe's Drush, so the person has to learn every part of Torah. You can never say, pick and choose, this part I'm not, this part I am. Because I only like part of you. doesn't exist. Hashem invested himself in every word of Torah. So a person has to learn all Torah. It's incumbent upon every person to learn Torah Chassidus. It's an obligation. Just to, I don't want to say this parenthetically note, it's very important to note. Because every part of Torah is part of Torah Hashem. Having said that, so when the person learns Chassidus as an example, of course he's connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's learning Torah Hashem. It's not what Alter Rebbe was talking about. In the end of Predicated, and so over here. And you're not doing something else, which is already good. And then you're learning Torah, which is, of course, the greatest union he has with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so learning Torah. If he learns a Mishnah, he learns a Halacha, he learns a Tanya, or any Maimer Chassidus, he's tuning, it's the greatest union. There's no other union which exists with even the HaKadosh Baruch Hu other than learning Torah, as an example. The Rebbe says it a few times in the Kutiyam, besides the fact it's all based on Talmud Torah Kineged Kulon. So, of course, you have the mitzvah learning Torah, and you're involved, and you're connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Alter Rebbe wasn't talking about the overall connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Alter Rebbe was talking about the experience of Ava, the love. Tedas says, "V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidach," with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. Really? Do you love HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Love is not a badge. Like Yiras Hashem is not a badge. I'm a Yari Hashem, I'm a Ayam Hashem. Ava is an experience. Ava is a sensational experience. Here comes the Alter Rebbe in the end of Perik Dal Gimel, and over here in this Geras HaKodesh, here says that you can be Mavin Umasi, actually the Chacham Mavin, which alludes there to Chacham Bin. You can see in the end of the third chapter, L'Kutei Amarim, first segment. You have a Chacham Mavin, you understand it, you grasp the idea, but you don't have Ava, you don't have Yira. The only way the Ava and Yira could come about is through the faculty of Das. You have to become intimate with the concept. That it becomes less conceptual, more it becomes a reality. And then, and only then, it could produce a true, genuine love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or v'yareisim Hashem, a true fear, awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thus, the essentiality of the component of das, because without das, there's no Ava v'yira. At all, for that matter. Alter Rebbe used the lashon dimyonis shav. It's an illusion. Yeah, I love Hashem because I just learned this, and I just spoke to 100 people, and I gave them such a beautiful presentation of the depth of Teres Achsidus and that mind that I learned. Of course, I have Avos Hashem. Of course, I have Yiras Hashem. No, you don't, says the Alter Rebbe. It's dimyonis shav. It's illusion. If you didn't put your das, you didn't become intimate with a concept that you just gave over to yourself, perhaps to others, nothing's happening. Conversely, if you do put your das to it, meaning to say, if you utilize the faculty of das, connecting with the concept, intimately connecting with the concept, then it would produce true, genuine love and genuine fear. As we look forward again, the Alter Rebbe in this chapter comes straight upon the das after, in a very similar order as in Peri Gimel. Have a wonderful night.